Miami, at night, is never truly quiet, but there is a kind of softness to it. The neon hum over the bay, the distant thump of music from South Beach, the slow sweep of patrol cars gliding past darkened storefronts. Somewhere in that glow, Dexter Morgan rinses his hands at a stainless steel sink, folds a set of knives into a roll of plastic, and walks back into a city that has no idea what just happened. By day, we see him in fluorescent light instead. Dexter at Miami Metro Homicide, coffee in one hand, case file in the other, moving through the bullpen with that mild, unthreatening smile. He is the meticulous blood spatter analyst, the quiet expert who can read a crime scene from the way blood arcs across a wall. Detectives lean on him. Supervisors sign off on his reports without hesitation. It almost feels impossible that no one, in all those years, looked at him and saw anything but a helpful colleague. And yet, the other life is always there. Under the pressed shirts and lab reports, there is the methodical serial killer who follows a strict code, choosing victims the courts failed to punish, wrapping his violence in a ritual of plastic, tape, and careful disposal in the dark water off Miami. Every close call, every near miss, every moment when the mask might crack is happening within driving distance of his own workplace. In the middle of that world, Marie LaGuerta is a constant presence. She glides through briefings with political ease, measures her words for the press, and keeps a careful eye on promotions and headlines. On the surface, she is image-focused, sometimes calculating. But beneath that, you start to see something else. A woman who remembers old cases, who files away inconsistencies, who does not fully accept an answer just because it is convenient. This is the story of the one person at Miami Metro who refused to stay comfortably fooled. When the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation lands on James Doakes and the department breathes a collective sigh of relief, almost everyone is grateful to move on. The case is closed, the narrative is tidy, the city can sleep. LaGuerta quietly cannot. Her history with Doakes, her sense of his character, and the details that do not quite align sit with her like a stone that never dissolves. So we are going to follow that stone, settle in, get comfortable, and let's walk slowly back through the series, through every season where Dexter's double life brushes against LaGuerta's attention. Because if everyone else was lulled by Morgan's carefully constructed normalcy, how did she become the one person who kept looking at the Bay Harbor Butcher file and seeing an unfinished puzzle? Across this video, we're past the marina. Officially, everyone gets to breathe again. Unofficially, for the people who looked closely, something about the calm never quite feels earned. The department needs a story they can live with, and Doakes gives them one. The angry sergeant who hated Dexter Morgan disappeared at the exact wrong time, found in a cabin that burns with his alleged trophies inside. The blood slides, the remote location, the explosion, it all lines up cleanly enough that Miami Metro, the FBI, and the press can draw a straight line and move on. Case closed. Career-saving closure in a single narrative. LaGuerta signs that narrative. She stands at the podium. She promotes the fallen sergeant as a tragic monster who fooled them all. But that is not the whole story, because this is the story of a woman who knew James Doakes before the headlines, who mentored him, who understood his temper and his principles, and who could not make those two things fit the image of a meticulous serial killer dismembering dozens of victims and dropping them into the bay. How likely is it, really, that the butcher is hiding inside Miami Metro itself? That he has a police ID, a parking space, access to every crime scene, and still leaves almost nothing behind? The bodies are wrapped with precision. The dump sites are carefully chosen. The trophies are microscopic slides of blood. It is an operation that requires time, access, and a frightening confidence in the institution meant to catch him. When you revisit it slowly, detail by detail, the improbability stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like design. And then there's Dexter, the quiet blood spatter analyst, with a boat in a city where bodies keep surfacing offshore. The man whose expertise shapes the very narrative of how the butcher kills. People notice him, but never all at once. Doakes sees the predator in the room. Lundy's profile of a forensically skilled insider with harbor access brushes right past Dexter's desk. LaGuerta files away her unease about Doakes and the man Doakes was always watching. Each of these is just a fragment, a strange look at a crime scene, a coincidence with a marina, a bloodslide pattern that feels too familiar. On their own, they are easy to ignore, easy to explain away if you want to sleep at night. But when you lay them all out together, you start to see a different shape emerging behind Dexter's mask. So, settle in, get comfortable. In the next part, we are going to move through those almost caught moments, one by one, with LaGuerta's doubt as our anchor, and watch how the sleeping monster of Bay Harbor slowly wakes back up. So settle in, get comfortable, because to understand how LaGuerta becomes the quiet engine behind Dexter Morgan's unmasking, we are going to step back and look at who she really is when the case files are closed and the cameras are off. Accepted. Case closed. Monster unmasked. Promotion secured. LaGuerta plays along in public, but the story never quite sits right with her. Doakes was volatile, yes. He was secretive. He was drawn to darkness. But a meticulous serial killer dumping bodies in the bay? That is not the man she knew. At the same time, her relationship with Dexter is almost the opposite. From the first seasons, their interactions are cordial, professional, and strangely distant. She thanks Morgan for his work, calls on him in briefings, praises his blood work when it helps close a file. He is useful and polite and perfectly forgettable. And that, for a captain who reads people for a living, is its own kind of red flag. Dexter is always there at the biggest scenes, always near the center of the storm, and yet he leaves almost no emotional footprint. You start to see that she notices the absence, even if she cannot name it yet. This is the story of a woman whose worst qualities and best qualities point her in the same dangerous direction. Her ambition means she is drawn to landmark cases like Bay Harbor. Her guilt over Doakes means she cannot fully rest with the official version of his death. Her observational skills mean that small inconsistencies in Dexter's behavior, his precise timing, his access, do not just wash away with the tide of paperwork. And there is a pivot point, a precise moment when her energy shifts from defending Doakes in the abstract to quietly watching Dexter in particular. When you lay them all out together, the choices she makes around that moment will tell us exactly how the Bay Harbor butcher case claws its way back from the grave. In the next section, let's move toward that turning point and watch how one overlooked piece of evidence at a church crime scene becomes LaGuerta's wake-up call. So, from that single, almost forgotten bloodslide on a church floor, we are going to pull the camera all the way back and watch the entire series as one long investigation, not just into the Bay Harbor butcher, but into Dexter Morgan himself. This is the story of how every close call, every near miss, every tiny crack in the mask slowly adds up to something LaGuerta can no longer explain away. To do that, we'll move season by season, calmly and in order, from the early days when Dexter walks into Miami Metro homicide as the friendly blood guy no one questions, to the final night when he stands in a shipping container with LaGuerta and Deborah, and the story has run out of places to hide. We are not just recapping plot, we are tracing a pattern of suspicion, watching how the same man can be seen as a hero, a weirdo, a suspect, and finally a monster, depending on who is willing to keep looking. Our focus will stay close to LaGuerta's line of sight. When Doakes tails Dexter to marinas and crime scenes, we'll notice what ends up in her reports and what gets to the GPS records, the gas station camera that catches him near Estrada right after she lets Estrada go. Let's sit with her as she connects the shipping container where his mother died, to Brian Moser, and to multiple butcher victims. And as her theory shifts from Doakes was framed to Dexter has been here the whole time. And we'll do it slowly. Settle in, get comfortable. The pacing will stay measured and soothing, even as we move toward that final confrontation in the shipping container, where LaGuerta's years of quiet suspicion finally collide with Dexter's carefully built life. Only by watching all of these moments back to back, without weeks or years between episodes, can you feel how inevitable her conclusion really was. In the next section, we'll start at the beginning, when no one at Miami Metro thinks to question the man who literally reads blood for a living. So for this part of the story, think of it less as a true crime breakdown and more as a long, late-night rewatch with someone who refuses to look away. You do not have to hold every detail of Miami Metro homicide in your head. You do not have to remember which season LaGuerta pulls which file. You can just let the scenes roll past while we quietly trace the line between them. Settle in, get comfortable. Maybe you are half watching the series again, or maybe the room is dark and you are only listening, letting the sounds of Dexter Morgan's world blur into the background. We are going to do the careful part for you, the pausing, the rewinding, the part where you ask, very softly, how did LaGuerta know? And when did that certainty actually begin? If you like this slower pace, this feeling that the show can be something you drift through instead of race through, you might want to stay close. You can subscribe, turn on notifications, and let the algorithm do the remembering for you, so that every time we map out another almost caught moment, it simply appears the next time you are ready to sink back into this world. No pressure, just an open door whenever you need it, because this is the story of a man who almost gets exposed over and over again, and of the people who nearly pull the mask away. Supporting the channel, even in small ways, is what makes it possible to follow those threads slowly, to sit with LaGuerta's files on her desk, or Doakes' reports, or Rita's doubts, and give each one the attention the series only hints at for a few seconds. It is what lets us plan future episodes that stay with other characters who come close to seeing Dexter clearly, and then look away, or are removed before they can speak. You do not have to do anything right now. If you are still awake by the end, if the credits have not completely blurred together, you can always leave case boxes. Back when the Bay Harbor butcher is an open wound on the evening news, and Maria LaGuerta is looking everywhere, except at the quiet man in the lab. In those first seasons, her world is framed by glass offices and promotion boards. She is chasing captains' bars, managing egos, smoothing things over with the press. Every major case is a chance to move up another rung, to protect the image of Miami Metro homicide as competent, decisive, in control. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation is not just about a serial killer. It is about donors, mayors, and federal oversight. The question is not simply, who is doing this, but how does this make us look? And in that environment, Dexter Morgan is perfect. He is the analyst who never complains, the one who brings donuts, the one whose blood work closes cases and makes the department's numbers look good. While the FBI profile of the butcher quietly points to a forensically skilled insider with access to a boat, LaGuerta is counting solved homicides, watching clearance rates rise, and seeing Dexter as an asset, not a suspect. When you lay them all out together, those early interactions feel almost too neat. The captain chasing headlines, the killer providing them with clean endings. This is the story of how institutional pressure can be louder than instinct. During the original Bay Harbor butcher hunt, LaGuerta's attention is pulled toward task force meetings, media briefings, and the urgent need to produce a culprit. Any small inconsistency around Dexter's availability, his proximity to certain scenes, his uncanny accuracy in reading blood, gets swallowed by a much larger narrative. The department is under siege, and someone needs to be sacrificed to restore order. That someone in the moment is James Doakes. His aggressive suspicion of Dexter registers to LaGuerta as a personnel problem, not a lead. He tails Morgan. He snaps at him in the bullpen. He violates the smooth, professional image she is trying to project. So she counsels, redirects, manages. She does not follow his gaze to the lab table. She follows his outbursts to the HR file. You start to see how, later, that misalignment is going to haunt her when she reopens those folders and realizes what he was really chasing. Because in these early days, Dexter's mask is almost flawless. He is the harmless lab tech, the helpful colleague, the grieving brother standing beside Deborah at press conferences, his voice soft, his eyes wet, his badge reflecting camera flashes. Every moment is calibrated to make suspicion feel impolite. If LaGuerta looks his way, what she sees is loyalty, competence, and grief. And yet, the seeds are there. Doakes' fixation. Dexter's name recurring in major case files. The way his work touches the butcher investigation at almost every turn. They are scattered, faint, easy to ignore in the rush of the department, the FBI, the press. They all get what they need. A convenient villain, a dead suspect who cannot argue, and a reason to stop asking questions. The city can move on. Miami Metro homicide can breathe again. On paper, LaGuerta moves with them. She stands at the press conferences. She signs off on reports. She allows the narrative to harden into fact, because to do anything else would mean accusing her own institution of closing ranks around a lie. Her career is climbing. The politics are delicate, and publicly defending a man like Doakes with his temper and his record is not a strategic move. So, she nods along. She lets the mask settle over the department. But that is not the whole story. Privately, LaGuerta does not stop being loyal to James Doakes. This is the story of someone who knew him before the Bay Harbor headlines, who saw the soldier, the uncompromising cop, the man who might bend rules but would not quietly ritualize murder in a cabin in the Everglades. when you lay them all out together, the pieces of the doakes theory never quite align for her. There is no clear method she can see, no forensic rhythm that matches the butcher's meticulous dismemberments and plastic-wrapped precision. Doakes is impulsive, explosive, a man who confronts danger head-on. The butcher is patient, surgical, almost obsessively controlled. The timing bothers her too. Key Bay Harbor events occur when Doakes is under surveillance, suspended, or otherwise boxed in. Yet the killings continue as if nothing has changed. You start to see how every explanation she is given requires one more compromise, one more close enough, in a case that should demand certainty. So the doubt stays, not loud, not career-ending, just a low, constant hum under the surface of her promotions and commendations. Seasons pass. New killers rise and fall in Miami. New storylines pull our attention away. But somewhere in the back of LaGuerta's mind, the question never fully closes. Did we really catch the right man? Or did we just bury our discomfort with a convenient corpse? That tension will sit there, almost forgotten, until something small and fragile survives another fire. Not a confession, not a body, a single blood slide in a ruined church, glinting under crime scene lights, waiting for the one person who still remembers what that pattern is supposed to mean. So we come back to that ruined church. The Doomsday Killer's sanctuary has already been stripped of its performance. No chanting, no apocalyptic tableaus, just dust hanging in the air and the low murmur of Miami Metro homicide processing what is left. Evidence markers glow under harsh lights. Broken pews, scorched wood, blackened walls where fire licked up and then died. It is the kind of scene you are used to by this point in the series. Chaos explodes in her expression. There is no dramatic gasp, just a flicker. Recognition before alarm. Because for LaGuerta, this is not just a lab artifact. This is the old case, the one that turned Miami into a documentary title. The Bay Harbor Butchers. Trophies. One slide for every victim. A private ritual of control hidden in a wooden box. She sat through those briefings. She listened as Lundy and the FBI sketched a profile of a forensically skilled insider with a boat. She watched as the slides were found in Doakes' car, and everyone exhaled in relief. Everyone except her. So when you lay them all out together in her memory, this tiny object in her hand is not neutral. It is a pattern trying to reassert itself. And yet, even here, she is split. The rational captain in her wants to file it away as coincidence or contamination. Another tech, another copycat, some procedural error that will be corrected in a supplemental report. But the part of her that knew James Doakes, that knew his temper and his honor in the same breath, cannot make the math work. Doakes is dead. The cabin burned. The slides were supposed to have burned with him. He cannot have left this here. That is the line she cannot quietly step over. So she does something that looks almost trivial from the outside. No press conference, no task force, no dramatic reopening. She simply orders the Bay Harbor boxes pulled from storage. Cardboard, dust, old photographs, GPS logs, victim lists. This is the story of a woman walking back into a case she was told to forget, telling herself she is only tying up a loose end. She does not yet understand that she has just reopened Dexter Morgan's past. And when she starts to read, you start to see how many of his mistakes were simply waiting for someone patient enough to turn the pages. The next file she chooses will matter. The next file she chooses is not dramatic. It is a property receipt, a routine evidence log, the kind of form Miami Metro Homicide generates by the thousands. But as LaGuerta smooths it out under the desk lamp, the past begins to rearrange itself. You start to see how dangerous quiet paperwork can be when someone actually reads it. She is alone by design. The records room is half forgotten, fluorescent hum, dust hanging in the air like old cigarette smoke. Boxes with the Bay Harbor case number are stacked in uneven columns, marker ink faded but still legible. Closed, the labels insist. Resolved. She pulls one down anyway, settles in, get comfortable in the chair that no one has adjusted in years, and starts laying files across the table in careful rows. This is the story of a woman who does not begin by hunting Dexter Morgan. She begins by defending trace evidence from a Bay Harbor dump site. He is not highlighted. He is not circled. He is just there, a quiet constant in the background of almost every moment. Pattern-oriented thinking is what made her a captain. So she does what she has always done. She starts lining things up. When you lay them all out together, you start to see a different chase. Doakes' GPS pings are not clustering around random victims. They are clustering around Dexter. Surveillance logs that once read as Doakes stalking targets, now read to her as Doakes shadowing the friendly analyst no one questioned. The mask of the official narrative slips just a little. Here, the pattern interrupt hits her. She realizes she has been tracing the wrong line through the same data for years. It is not that new facts have appeared. It is that the old facts have rotated. By the time she closes the last folder for the night, LaGuerta is not ready to accuse anyone. But she is unsettled in a way she cannot file away. There are more questions than answers now, and for the first time, Dexter Morgan is no longer invisible to her on the page. He is a presence. He is a problem. And she knows she is going to have to step out of the records room and test whether the pattern holds in the real world. So when she finally steps out of that records room, there is a very specific place LaGuerta goes to test the pattern. She does not head to a crime scene or an interview room. She walks the quiet hallway toward the glass box of Dexter Morgan's lab at Miami Metro Homicide, the place she has passed 1,000 times without really looking. We are going to sit there with her for a moment on the other side of that glass. Dexter is doing what he always does. He has a tray of slides, a fresh blood sample, the overhead lights giving everything that clean, clinical glow. He moves with that easy competence everyone trusts. He is, by all appearances, the least threatening man in the building. But that is no longer the whole story, because now, when she watches his hands, LaGuerta is also seeing the crime scene photos from the Bay Harbor dump sites, the careful cuts, the absence of chaos. She is seeing the way the original profile described a forensically skilled insider with access to evidence, with a boat, with a schedule that matched the killings, a little too well when you lay them all out together. She used to think of Dexter as background, harmless, helpful, almost forgettable. The guy who brings pastries, makes the science sound simple in press briefings, and fades into the edges of the room when the real arguments start. A mask so gentle, it never seemed worth questioning. Now you start to see the shift. She notices how utterly calm he is with blood, not just professionally composed, but almost soothed by it. The way his face goes, still in a way that does not quite match everyone else's discomfort. More often than any victim. So, at this stage, she does not know. She is holding two competing stories in her mind: the official narrative that died with Doakes in that cabin, and this quiet, dangerous idea that the real killer might be standing 10 feet away, labeling a slide. She does not act yet. She watches. She files the feeling away. But from this point on, every case that brushes against Dexter, every odd coincidence, and every late-night disappearance will also brush against LaGuerta's growing suspicion, whether she is ready to admit it out loud or not. And once that kind of attention settles on someone like Morgan, it does not let go. Once that attention settles, it needs somewhere to go. For LaGuerta, it goes back to the water, back to Bay Harbor, back to the quiet, methodical pattern of bodies that Miami Metro homicide once treated like a closed chapter in the city's history, even though the edges of that chapter never really stopped bleeding into the present. We are going to sit with that pattern for a moment. Weighted garbage bags, cut with the same care every time. Bodies dismembered in a way that suggested not just brutality, but routine, dropped in the ocean at points where the currents would carry them out and scatter them, but not so far that they vanished. This was someone who knew the tides, knew the channels, and most importantly, had regular, unremarkable access to a boat. Back during the original Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, those dump sites were plotted on charts, currents modeled, routes estimated. It all lived in thick binders and digital reports that the FBI eventually packed away when Doakes died, and the story became convenient. But years later, after that bloodslide at Travis Marshall's church, and after her first quiet doubts about Dexter Morgan, LaGuerta pulls those charts back out and looks at them with new eyes. This time, she is not only asking where the bodies surfaced, she is asking who, in their orbit, moved through those same stretches of water as part of their normal life. It is a small shift in question, but it changes everything. Because when you lay them all out together, the maps, the old tide projections, the marina records that no one bothered to cross-reference, you start to see that the ocean has a memory. And in that memory, there is a familiar name. Dexter's boat, the slice of life, had always been framed as a harmless hobby, one more piece of his sunny Miami mask. A blood spatter analyst who likes to fish, who likes the calm of the water after the chaos of homicide scenes. On paper, it looks almost therapeutic, but therapy looks different when you overlay it with dump site coordinates. LaGuerta quietly requests marina logs, GPS data, maintenance slips. She does it in pieces, never enough at once to draw attention. A weekend trip logged here, a late-night departure there. If the ocean is telling her Dexter's story, what else has he left behind on land? On land, the trail leads her somewhere much darker than a marina. It leads her back to a rusting metal box where Dexter Morgan's entire life began, and, in a way, never really left. The shipping container where Laura Moser was butchered is not just a crime scene in this series. It is the origin point of the monster and the mask, the place where a small boy sat in blood for days until Harry pulled him out and decided what that horror was going to mean. And when you lay them all out together, the Bay Harbor dump sites, the old cartel files, Brian Moser's history, you start to see that this one container is a quiet center of gravity for everything that follows. LaGuerta does not arrive there by accident. She is working backwards from the Bay Harbor Butcher case files she pulled out of storage, from the realization that so many of Dexter's random blood spatter assignments intersect with one very specific world of drug dealers, traffickers, and enforcers. Men like Santos Jimenez, men tied to Laura Moser, men who, strangely, keep vanishing forever instead of turning up in Miami Metro homicide reports. As she digs into Doakes' old notes and the original investigation, she uncovers the link to that container, the slaughter of an informant and her sons, the birth records that reveal Brian and Dexter Moser, the adoption that turned one boy into Dexter Morgan. At first, it looks like context, a tragic backdrop. Then she notices how many Bay Harbor victims trace back to the same cartel network that spilled that blood on the floor. The same faces, the same crews, the same line running straight from a childhood trauma to an adult killer's preferred target list. This is where the case stops being just logistics for her. Until now, she's been following algae samples, GPS routes, boat slips. Now she is standing inside a narrative. She begins to ask not only who could have done this, but who would need to. A boy who watched his mother dismembered in a shipping container, raised by a cop who taught him a code. Growing up inside Miami Metro with unrestricted access to files on the very kind of men who destroyed his family. That is not just a coincidence. It is a motive with structure. Let's pause on that because it is the pattern interrupt for LaGuerta herself. She has spent an entire career believing in systems, in evidence, in the clean separation between victim and offender. Now, we are going to watch her confront a story where the victim grew up to design a ritual of plastic, knives, and trophies that mirrors the original trauma almost perfectly. From this point on, Dexter's life story can no longer sit in her link to the origin of Morgan's darkness and exactly the kind of target Harry's code would mark in red. For Dexter, Estrada is unfinished business. For LaGuerta, when you lay them all out together, he is something else entirely. Bait. By this point in the season, LaGuerta is no longer casually curious about the Bay Harbor butcher. She is actively probing it. She has the blood slide from Travis Marshall's church. She has Doakes' old files. She has the shipping container number that ties Dexter's childhood trauma to multiple victims. And as she scans prison records, Estrada's name jumps out as a rare constant between the massacre that made Dexter and the man Dexter might have become. So she makes a decision that quietly changes the rules. Instead of waiting for another lucky piece of evidence, she decides to move a piece herself. She arranges for Estrada's release under the guise of a compassionate, bureaucratic review, but in reality under very controlled conditions. The paperwork is shuffled, dates are adjusted, and only a handful of people know that a key witness to the Morgan family tragedy is about to walk free in Miami. On the surface, it looks like a long-shot attempt to flip an aging criminal. Underneath, it is a calculated risk. If the Bay Harbor butcher is still active, if he is who she increasingly suspects, then a man like Estrada should be irresistible. This is the story of a detective turning from archaeologist into hunter. She is not just brushing dust off old bones. She is setting out fresh meat to see what comes to feed. And this is where you start to see the investigation shift. Up until now, LaGuerta has been looking backward, rereading reports, revisiting crime scenes, reconstructing the pattern of a killer who always seemed one step ahead. With Estrada, she steps into the present tense. She is watching schedules, monitoring transfers, quietly observing Dexter's reactions at every moment, from the briefing room to the bullpen. Dexter, of course, takes the bait. He cannot not take it. The man who made him watches the man he became, and somewhere in between, LaGuerta is watching both. Now, let's settle in. Get comfortable with this new phase, because the game has changed. LaGuerta is no longer hoping the mask slips by accident. She is building situations designed to pull it off, even if she does not yet realize just how close Dexter Morgan already is to stepping into her trap. So when LaGuerta arranges Hector Estrada's controlled release, it is not an act of mercy. It is a stake in the ground. She knows Estrada is the man who slaughtered Dexter's mother. She knows this is the origin point of the Bay Harbor butcher's psychology, and quietly, she is waiting to see who circles the bait. Estrada steps out of prison and into a carefully managed Miami that thinks this is just another parole case. But for LaGuerta, every moment if you are not paying close attention. But LaGuerta has been paying attention for years. This is where the investigation shifts. Up to now, she has been working with patterns, with history, with the uncomfortable way Dexter's name keeps brushing against Bay Harbor files. But a time-stamped image is different. It anchors suspicion to a specific place, a specific hour, a specific man. When you lay them all out together, the blood slide at Travis Marshall's church, the shipping container, Doakes' old tail logs, you start to see that Dexter is not just adjacent to her theory. He is orbiting it. When she confronts him, Dexter does what he always does. He improvises a story that sounds protective, selfless, almost chivalrous. He claims he was following LaGuerta, worried that she was putting herself in danger by playing games with Estrada. On the surface, it is plausible. Dexter, the concerned colleague from Miami Metro Homicide, trailing his lieutenant to keep her safe. But that is not the whole story. Because the explanation that seems to deflect her suspicion also confirms something deeper. Dexter anticipated her move, tracked her strategy, and inserted himself into the blind spot of her own operation. This is the story of a hunter who refuses to admit he is being hunted. Inside LaGuerta, a quiet threshold is crossed. She may not have enough to accuse him publicly, not yet, but in her mind, the probability has hardened into near certainty. Dexter Morgan is the Bay Harbor butcher, and as she follows the gas station footage forward, frame by frame, we're going to see that this is not the last camera he will struggle to stay out of. LaGuerta has the gas station footage. She has Estrada disappearing into thin air, but suspicion on a screen is still abstract. To move Dexter Morgan from theory to reality, she needs something colder, something that does not care about office politics or personal history. She needs the ocean. So she does something that, years earlier, Doakes had done in a cruder, louder way. She starts following the boat, quietly. No confrontations in the parking lot, no shouting matches in the bullpen at Miami Metro Homicide. Instead, she pulls marina records under other pretexts, checks slip assignments, fuel logs, and maintenance requests. She calls in favors with Harbor Patrol, with Coast Guard contacts who still remember the Bay Harbor butcher investigation as the most infamous case of their careers. On paper, Dexter's boat is unremarkable, a modest vessel, a familiar name, a blood spatter analyst who likes to fish. But when you lay them all out together, the records start to hum with a different kind of meaning. LaGuerta gets access to archived GPS pings from routine maritime sweeps, patrol reports, even the old FBI mapping from Lundy's task force. Then she begins to overlay Dexter's recent. Bay Harbor butcher stops being a ghost from an old season and becomes a living man who smiles at her in morning briefings. And underneath the analysis, there is risk. If she is wrong, she is effectively stalking an innocent colleague, burning political capital, and resurrecting a closed case on a hunch. If she is right, she is circling a serial killer who has already outsmarted an entire federal task force once. There is no safe version of this outcome. Now, let's pause on that for a moment, because this is the story of a woman who understands that whichever way the evidence breaks, she will be standing there alone when it happens. By the time she pushes back from those charts, LaGuerta is not merely suspicious anymore. She is mentally preparing for a trial no one else believes is coming, rehearsing the steps she will need to take to prove, piece by piece, that Dexter Morgan is the Bay Harbor butcher, even if she has to walk into the dark after him by herself. So when LaGuerta stands up from those charts, she does not walk away from the past. She walks straight back into it. The next place we are going to is not a crime scene, but a ghost. Sergeant James Doakes, preserved in boxes, binders, and half-forgotten logs in the evidence room of Miami Metro homicide. She pulls his surveillance notes, tail logs, the unofficial observations he was never supposed to write down, but did anyway. For years, these pages were treated as the work of a man who had gone off the rails, obsessed with Dexter Morgan for personal reasons. Now she reads them with a different assumption. What if Doakes was onto something real? On paper, the pattern is almost boring. Dates, times, locations. Observed Morgan leaving the station. Followed Morgan to Marina. Morgan present at scene before uniforms. But when you lay them all out together, you start to see what Doakes had been circling. He was not randomly orbiting crime scenes. He was orbiting Dexter. LaGuerta traces his routes on a map, and the lines keep bending back toward the same points. Dexter's condo, Dexter's lab, the slip where his boat is docked, the same marina that sits a short ride from the Bay Harbor dump sites. It is as if Doakes was drawing, in slow motion, the outline of a predator he could not yet name. And this is the story of a woman who realizes that every note she once dismissed as harassment now reads like early warning. The tale that put Doakes near a crime scene, if he was following Dexter, it stops being incriminating. The late night appearance at the marina, if he was watching Morgan's boat, it becomes corroboration. Every piece of paper that clears Doakes shifts its weight onto Dexter instead. The professional revelation is braided, and once she lets herself believe that, the Bay Harbor butcher is no longer history. It is present tense, moving, breathing, and in her mind, still riding a boat out of that same marina. Now, let's follow her as she tests that possibility in the real world, where one wrong step could finally force Dexter into the light. So once LaGuerta lets the Bay Harbor butcher live again in her mind, the next step is almost automatic. If this killer is still out there, still working, then his victims should tell a coherent story. Not just any story, but one that fits the quiet patterns inside Miami Metro homicide itself. On paper, the butcher's profile has always been simple, almost seductively clean. Career criminals, abusers, predators who walked out of court on technicalities, or never made it to trial at all. Men like drug dealers, rapists, traffickers, all vanishing with almost surgical precision, as if someone were running a private, off-the-books justice system in the dark water around Miami. No trophies anyone could see, no bodies left behind, just gaps in the criminal ecosystem that the FBI tried to map and never fully understood. But now, LaGuerta is not the captain signing off on reports. She is a detective again, and Dexter Morgan is no longer just the affable analyst who brings donuts. So she goes back to the old victim lists. She starts laying them out beside Miami Metro case files, beside old arrest reports, beside names she remembers Dexter saying out loud in the bullpen. And when you lay them all out together, you start to see the overlap tighten. The butcher's targets line up with cases Dexter worked, scenes where he processed blood, criminals who slipped away and left everyone in homicide frustrated, a cartel enforcer whose file crossed Dexter's desk, a wife-beater whose blood spatter he reconstructed, offenders whose names show up both in the butcher's victim log and in Dexter's workload history. What once looked like random vigilante justice starts to feel like a curated list, drawn from the exact pool of people Dexter would know were guilty. That is where the idea of a code begins to crystallize for her. Not a chaotic spree, but a set of rules. Only people who deserve it. Only those the system failed to contain. Only those a forensic blood analyst would be uniquely positioned to confirm. And when she remembers his file, his foster father, the childhood trauma everyone whispers about, this structured mercy-killing pattern starts to look uncomfortably like it was built around Dexter's own origin story. We are going to see her follow that thought to darker places. Because the more she maps, the more Dexter's professional access becomes part of the pattern itself. His late nights, his access to evidence, his knowledge of dump sites and tides, his boat sitting in the same marina, the ordinary. Morgan gliding through Miami Metro homicide with a box of donuts in one hand and a case file in the other. Light jokes with Masuka, a gentle check-in with Deb. Then he steps up to a bloodstain, tilts his head, and calmly narrates the trajectory of a life being ended, as if he were describing the path of a raindrop down a window. We are going to sit with her in those quiet, observational moments, because that is where her certainty starts to harden. She remembers the bloodslide at Travis Marshall's church. She remembers that the Bay Harbor butcher took trophies exactly like that. And now, when Dexter leans over a photograph of a mutilated body, she notices what is missing. No flinch, no disgust, just focus. At first, that absence could pass for professionalism, but when you lay them all out together, the small dissonances begin to form a pattern. A child dismembered, a cop killed, a serial killer's altar discovered. Everyone else in the room has some visible reaction, some crack in the mask. Dexter's face barely moves. His voice stays level. His eyes track the blood, not the person it used to be. This is the story of a woman who has seen real monsters and knows they do not always snarl. LaGuerta starts to replay old memories with new context. The way Dexter always seemed to materialize at the edges of major cases, helpful but never truly shaken. The way he could disappear for an hour in the middle of a crisis and return with a plausible explanation and a slightly too bright smile. And then there is the mask itself. For years, she accepted his performance of normalcy as genuine, the shy humor, the self-deprecating comments about being a lab rat, the carefully timed concern. Now you start to see the seams, the laugh that comes a beat late, the consoling words that sound right but land flat, the way he studies people in conversation, as if he is mirroring what they expect rather than feeling it. Pattern interrupt. One afternoon, She walks past the lab and catches him alone, staring at a blood slide on the light box a little too long, his face completely blank. By the time he senses her and turns, the mask is back, but she has seen the mirror underneath, that empty surface reflecting only what is placed in front of it. Her conviction shifts. The Bay Harbor butcher is no longer a shadow outside the institution. He is a man who has learned to reflect back exactly what Miami Metro wants to see. A diligent analyst, a loyal colleague, a harmless presence. So you get these unsettling images. LaGuerta and Dexter at the coffee machine, trading polite words, sharing an elevator, standing shoulder to shoulder over a body. Two professionals making small talk, each increasingly certain that the other is not what they seem. And only one of them knows how far the other is willing to go to prove it. So when ignition, he is the friendly expert, the blood spatter analyst whose testimony has helped secure convictions, whose quiet presence reassures juries and colleagues. To point at him and say, "This is the butcher," without airtight proof, is to invite a legal earthquake. Every case he has touched becomes suspect. Every conviction could be appealed. Every defense attorney in Miami starts circling. LaGuerta knows this. She also knows how it will look for her personally. If she goes public too early, she is not the brave truth teller. She is the captain who cannot let go of a dead lover's name. The woman reopening Doakes' file out of grief or guilt or obsession. When you lay them all out together, the closed case, the internal politics, her own history with Doakes, you start to see how easy it would be to paint her as unstable. So she cannot simply stand up in the squad room and accuse Dexter. She has to move in the shadows. Quiet file pulls, quiet favors, quiet tests. She releases Estrada from custody, not as a grand gesture, but as a controlled experiment, watching to see whether Dexter's path just happens to cross his. She studies GPS records, boat logs, the old Bay Harbor dump sites, not because she enjoys paperwork, but because the only safety she has is in the numbers. This forces her to become two different people at once. By day, the political operator, attending briefings, shaking hands, reassuring the press that Miami is safe. By night, the private investigator, of one, poring over Doakes' old surveillance, replaying that gas station footage, staring at a tiny image of Dexter near Estrada, and asking herself how much coincidence she is willing to tolerate. And in that split, this is the story of a subtle transformation. The woman who once played the promotion game now finds herself as the only person willing to follow the truth wherever it leads, even if it walks her straight out of her own career. She is walking a tightrope. Move too fast, and she falls alone. Move too slow, and Morgan's mask settles back into place, and the Bay Harbor butcher may slip away forever. Now, let's watch what happens when that tightrope starts to fray. That tightrope starts to fray the moment Dexter realizes LaGuerta is not just revisiting an old case file, but quietly orbiting him. You start to see it in the small intrusions. Her questions that sound casual, but land a little too close. Her presence at his boat slip in the marina. Her sudden, renewed interest in Hector Estrada, the man who just happens to be tied to Dexter Morgan's most private origin story. Dexter feels it. He has spent an entire series reading killers, and now the gaze is turned back on him. When LaGuerta pulls him into her office with the gas station footage that shows him near, that people already think she is obsessed with clearing Doakes. It sounds like concern. It is, in reality, a subtle attempt to redirect the narrative away from him and back toward the convenient, dead suspect the department has already accepted. But that is not the whole story, because every time Dexter slips out of one of these traps, LaGuerta learns something about the man she is hunting. She sees how quickly he adapts, how he anticipates her angles, how he always seems to be thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead. When you lay them all out together, each successful deflection does not erase her suspicion. It refines her profile. This is the story of a killer who plans, who studies, who understands procedure well enough to weaponize it. What unfolds between them is a psychological duel played in conference rooms and corridors. Calm, polite conversations about evidence and office politics, with a much darker, unspoken battle humming underneath over who gets to define reality. We are going to watch Dexter try to keep his mask perfectly still while LaGuerta tests every seam. And every time he almost loses his balance and then recovers, her resolve does not soften. It hardens. By the time they reach that final shipping container, she will not be guessing anymore. The only question left will be whether she lives long enough to say it out loud. LaGuerta has always known that cases do not exist in isolation. They sit inside people, inside families, inside long chains of cause and effect. So when she turns back to Dexter Morgan, she does not just see a likable, blood-spatter analyst at Miami Metro homicide. She sees the ghost of another man who almost tore that department apart, Brian Moser, the ice truck killer. The brother Dexter never knew he had until it was almost too late. At the time, that revelation played like pure sensationalism inside the series. 2 brothers, separated by trauma, reunited on opposite sides of a murder investigation. But when you lay them all out together, the facts start to feel less like a twist and more like a psychological profile waiting to be read. LaGuerta remembers every headline, every internal briefing. Brian and Dexter, both born to Laura Moser, both left in that shipping container, sitting in their mother's blood, both disappearing into the system. One ends up with Harry Morgan, trained into a model citizen who walks into Miami Metro every morning with donuts and easy charm. The other grows into a meticulous serial killer who stages tableau across the city. How likely is it, really, that only one of them internalized the violence? This is the story of a probability problem that will not leave her alone. 2 brothers, same origin, same formative nightmare, both orbiting the same police department. One exposed as the ice truck killer, the other standing over his body when the case is finally closed. With Harry, Dexter's entry into Miami Metro, Brian's reappearance, and death, the first confirmed Bay Harbor butcher dumps in the water. The evolution of the butcher's techniques, tracking alongside Dexter's growing seniority inside the system. Now, let's add the final layer that keeps her awake. The same shipping container that birthed Brian's pathology and Dexter's trauma is later tied to multiple Bay Harbor victims. The same family horror, echoing through different bodies. At a certain point, Dexter's life no longer reads to LaGuerta as the tragic backstory of an innocent man. It reads like the origin myth of the very killer she is hunting, written years before anyone knew his name. Once LaGuerta starts reading Dexter's life as an origin story instead of a sob story, every close call with him takes on a different charge. The rhythm at Miami Metro Homicide shifts. You can feel it. There's this recurring pulse to the investigation, a spike of suspicion, a neat explanation, and then a forced return to something like normal. Not calm, just professionally polite denial. This is the story of a man who is very good at sounding reasonable. Every time the tension crests, Morgan offers a narrative that lets everyone breathe again. When the bloodslide turns up at Travis Marshall's church and points straight back to the Bay Harbor butcher, LaGuerta's suspicion spikes hard toward Dexter. He had access. He knew the case. He fits the profile. But then he walks into her office, looks wounded, and talks about doakes, about old ghosts, about how reopening this will only hurt the department. The mask is empathy. The function is self-preservation. We're going to see this pattern repeat. She tests him with Estrada, quietly releasing the man who connects Dexter's childhood trauma to current Bay Harbor victims. The next thing she knows, gas station footage catches Dexter's SUV near Estrada right after that release. It is damning in the abstract, but Dexter calmly reframes it as coincidence, as an anxious son trying to confront a figure from his past. When you lay them all out together, these moments look like a confession written in logistics. In isolation, each one can be smoothed over. The boat trips work the same way. LaGuerta pulls GPS data, traces Dexter's routes out of Miami, sees his path skimming along the old dump sites. On paper, it is almost too perfect. On the floor of Miami Metro, it becomes a debate about fishing habits, about tides, about how many people in the city own a boat. She is pressured, gently and then not so gently, to doubt herself. Colleagues remind her that Doakes was the official butcher, that the case is closed, that grief over his name might be clouding her judgment. That pressure has a psychological cost. You start to see her hesitate before she speaks, to wonder thought moments do not just isolate Dexter, they isolate LaGuerta. Because the more clearly she sees him, the more she runs into something bigger than one killer, a system that has already decided who everyone is supposed to be. By the time we are in Season 7, Dexter Morgan is not just a colleague at Miami Metro Homicide. He is the quiet center of gravity in the room, the blood spatter analyst who turns chaos into clean diagrams, who walks you through trajectories and cast off and tells you what happened when the bodies cannot talk for themselves. People build a comfort zone around that. You start to see how much easier it is for everyone when the friendly analyst is reliable, unassuming, always there with donuts and answers. That comfort is not abstract. It is baked into every case file. When a crime scene feels overwhelming, Dexter makes it legible. When evidence seems contradictory, Dexter's reconstruction smooths the edges. And every time he does that, he becomes less likely, in their minds, to be the source of the chaos. The person who explains the violence cannot also be the one who creates it. Not if you want to feel safe at work. Now, layer on the Bay Harbor butcher. Officially, that story is over. Doakes was volatile, secretive, disappeared in a cabin that burned with his body and Dexter's planted bloodslide. The FBI signed off. The media moved on. Miami breathed out. To reopen that case is not just paperwork. It is an admission that the task force missed something enormous, that the celebrated win might actually be a historic failure. So when LaGuerta finds a fresh slide at Travis Marshall's church and quietly pulls the old files, she is not only questioning Dexter, she is questioning the institution that promoted her, the colleagues she laughs with, the seasons of her own career built on that solved case. If Doakes was innocent, then everyone who nodded along bears a piece of that mistake. Confirmation bias does the rest. Doakes was always the aggressive one, the man who barked at suspects and glared at Morgan across the bullpen. Dexter was always the helpful one. Once those roles harden, new information gets sorted instead of examined. A suspicious GPS ping, a boat near Bay Harbor, a gas station camera catching Dexter near Estrada after LaGuerta releases him as bait. Each detail can be explained away, as long as you need Dexter to stay harmless. That is what makes LaGuerta's theory so radioactive. If she is right, then Miami Metro Homicide has spent years eating birthday cake with the Bay Harbor butcher, handing him evidence, letting him into every secure scene. It is not just Dexter's mask at risk. It is the department's sense of competence, their belief that the line between them and the monster. On every surface, seams taped, drains covered. He positions the body like a piece of evidence, not a person. He talks to them, but he also documents them. A single cut, controlled, to get the blood he wants. Slides prepared with the same steady hands. That, in daylight, diagrams spatter on a whiteboard for a room full of detectives who think they are looking at pure objectivity. And every dismemberment is a lesson he has already taught himself at work. Clean cuts at the joints to minimize trace. Tools chosen to leave as little distinctive patterning as possible. He thinks like a blood analyst, even when he is standing over a plastic-wrapped table at 2 a.m. The same mind that walks a daytime scene, explaining cast-off and impact, walks a nighttime scene, and designs it so there will be nothing to explain. At first, that overlap is invisible because no one is comparing those worlds. But LaGuerta has lived inside the Bay Harbor butcher file for years. When she pulls those photos again after the Travis Marshall church slide, she is not just seeing horror, she is seeing style. The careful absence of blood where there should be chaos. The way the kill rooms look almost staged for a training seminar. When you lay them all out together, you start to see a pattern that feels less like chance and more like authorship. She knows Dexter's lab work. She has read his reports, heard his briefings, watched him walk a room and reconstruct violence from the tiniest drops. So, when she studies the butcher's scenes, the language in her head is already his language. The angles, the precision, the almost respectful containment of the mess. It is as if the same quiet narrator is describing both. This is the thin line he walks. The same skills that make him indispensable to the system are the ones he weaponizes against it. He solves crimes by day and prevents his own detection by night, using the exact same toolkit. And this is the story of how that duality stops looking like a clever premise and starts looking to LaGuerta like the only logical explanation. For her, it is both fascinating and horrifying. Fascinating because the elegance of it appeals to the part of her that loves order and control. Horrifying because it means the institution she leads has been feeding, promoting, and protecting its own predator. The Bay Harbor butcher did not evade Miami. He embedded himself in its most trusted processes. Pattern interrupt. Watch Dexter at a daytime scene now. He stands over a blood pool with a camera, tilts his head, calculates trajectories. LaGuerta watches too, and in her mind, she overlays another image. The same posture, the same tilt, but in the dark, under plastic, with a knife instead of a camera. Once you see both frames at once, the mask never. There's the slide. One small rectangle of glass, tucked where it should not be, carrying a single preserved drop of blood. The same size, the same feel, the same private ritual she saw 100 times in the Bay Harbor photos. Officially, it is an anomaly, unrelated, a curiosity. But in her mind, this is the moment the two cases shake hands. The Doomsday Killer is dead. The Bay Harbor butcher, supposedly dead with doakes, has just spoken in his old language again. This is the story of how a trophy becomes a bridge. If a butcher slide is sitting in Travis Marshall's church, someone physically carried that signature from one case to the other. Someone who knew exactly what those trophies meant and who felt safe enough to bring that habit back into the open, right under Miami Metro's nose. LaGuerta does not say Dexter's name yet, but you can feel the circle tightening around him. We are going to watch her start asking a different question. Not who is the Doomsday Killer, but who is using Doomsday as cover. She considers that Dexter's remarkable timing, his solo leads, his habit of arriving just before or just after bodies are found might not be lucky breaks. They might be choreography. A man blending his work with his rituals so thoroughly that no one thinks to separate them. And once that thought lands, his pattern across the series looks different. The Ice Truck Killer, Trinity, Doomsday. Every high-profile monster somehow puts Dexter at the center of the investigation. LaGuerta starts to suspect that he is not just drawn to violence because he can read it. He is staying close to the violence he creates, shepherding it, making sure it never quite points back at him. By the time she files the paperwork to quietly reopen Bay Harbor, the church is no longer a doomsday crime scene in her memory. It is a crossroads where an old ghost and a living colleague quietly intersect, and where the mask of Dexter Morgan finally stops looking like coincidence. From that crossroads at the church, LaGuerta does not storm into Miami Metro homicide with accusations. She does something quieter and in many ways more unnerving. She starts talking to Dexter Morgan a little differently. The questions are still polite. The tone is still professional, but the edges of the conversation get sharper. We are going to sit in those edges for a moment, because when you lay them all out together, you start to see how deliberate they are. One day, it is a casual. "You still keeping that boat at the same marina, Dexter?" said in passing, as if she is only making small talk about his weekend plans. Another day, she asks where he was when Estrada disappeared, or how he ended up near a gas station that just happens to sit between the prison and the docks. On paper, these are nothing. In the room, they are small stress tests. Dexter's answers, underneath, it is a controlled experiment. Their body language tells a parallel story. He leans just close enough to seem open, but keeps a careful distance. She smiles, but does not soften. Eye contact lingers half a beat too long. These are not explosive confrontations. There is no shouting, no slammed doors. Instead, there is the quiet pressure of two people who both know this conversation is about something else and are pretending it is not. And every one of these moments becomes a data point for her. This is the story of a woman building a psychological profile, not from files, but from coffee break questions and hallway chats. She confirms that Dexter is not just under suspicion. He is aware of being watched and actively managing his image in response. By the time she is ready to move openly against him, she already knows how he lies, how he deflects, and what he looks like when he is gently, but unmistakably, cornered. The only thing she does not yet know is how far he will go when the corners close in for real. So now we are going to sit with LaGuerta in the quiet part of the hunt, where nothing explodes and no one runs, but everything sharpens. This is the part of the story where a suspicion turns into a file, and a file turns into a case. She does not open an official Bay Harbor butcher binder in the middle of Miami Metro homicide. She starts a private dossier. In her office, after hours, she prints out years of marina records and boat logs, highlighting Dexter Morgan's slip, his launch times, his returns that do not quite match his work schedule. She lays out photos of the original dump sites in Bay Harbor, aerial shots and crime scene stills, then adds new images from more recent bodies that feel, to her, like echoes. On another stack, she places the gas station footage stills. Dexter at the pump. Dexter near Estrada. Dexter exactly where he should not be. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how she thinks. She is not just collecting random red flags. She is building timelines. One column for the old Bay Harbor investigation, one for the Doomsday Killer season, one for the sudden reappearance of Hector Estrada. She threads in copies of old Bay Harbor reports, pages where Dexter's name appears only in passing as the blood guy, and she underlines those moments like they are missed opportunities. She adds notes on Estrada's history, on the shipping container where Dexter's mother died, on how many of the butcher's confirmed victims connect back to that single rusting locus of trauma. This is the story of a narrative being assembled in private. Child found in blood. Grows up to be a forensics expert. Works every day inside the very institution, hunting the killer who dumps bodies off the same coast where his boat quietly travels. The lines are not yet admissible, but they are, to her, undeniable. And still, images is also a line that passes through the man they blamed instead. Now, let's notice what that does to her. The case is almost complete in her mind. The timelines, the patterns, the connections are all there. All that remains is the one thing paper cannot give her, a moment where Dexter's mask slips in real time, where she can catch him in a situation so precise, so damning, that no amount of charm, no history at Miami Metro can protect him. So she waits, not because she is unsure, and not because the story in her head is incomplete, but because LaGuerta understands something that almost no one else at Miami Metro homicide is willing to admit out loud. Accusing Dexter Morgan is not just about catching a killer. It is about attacking the foundation of the department's favorite myth, the friendly analyst, the loyal colleague, the man who helped close so many cases. If she goes public too soon, she loses instantly. A formal accusation without something irrefutable would give Dexter time to do exactly what he does best: adapt. He could vanish on the slice of life, destroy whatever evidence she has not already collected, and turn that easy charm toward painting her as the obsessed captain who cannot let the Bay Harbor butcher go. Every moment she hesitates is dangerous, but a reckless move would be worse. We are going to see that this is not theoretical for her. LaGuerta has already lived through the weaponization of doubt. When Doakes was framed and then killed, the narrative hardened overnight. The department needed the case to be over. Questioning that conclusion was treated as disloyal, even unprofessional. So, when you lay them all out together, Doakes' death, the bloodslide at Travis Marshall's church, Dexter's proximity to Estrada, you start to see why she treats timing as carefully as evidence. She knows office politics can kill a case faster than any defense attorney. A captain who drags the beloved blood guy into an interrogation room with nothing but a hunch does not just risk embarrassment. She risks demotion, isolation, and the quiet exile that comes when the rest of homicide decides she has lost perspective. LaGuerta understands that people cling to comforting stories, and right now, Dexter is one of theirs. There is another layer, and it is colder. If she moves and fails, Dexter walks away, smarter. He will know exactly how close she came, which angles she used, which witnesses she leaned on. He will change his patterns, his dump sites, his mask. The Bay Harbor butcher will not only remain free, he will become almost impossible to corner again. In a way, the only thing more frightening than Dexter as he is now is Dexter after surviving a direct is not just a name on a file or a loose end from an old case. He is a living, breathing link to the night that made Dexter Morgan who he is, the origin point of the Bay Harbor butcher. When you lay them all out together, the shipping container, Brian Moser, the Bay Harbor dump sites, you start to see why she cannot afford to spend Estrada in a single move. This is the man who was in that container with Laura Moser, the man whose name makes Dexter's voice tighten and his mask slip just a little. For LaGuerta, he becomes more than a lead. He becomes a pressure point. Press it hard enough, and Dexter will have to react. So she arranges circumstances to put Estrada back into play. Quietly, carefully, she works the system the way Dexter works a kill room. She pushes for his release under the guise of a controlled operation, frames it as an opportunity to flip an old criminal into an informant. On paper, it is a routine decision in a crowded Miami Metro homicide docket. In reality, it is bait, calibrated to Dexter's code and his history. LaGuerta is betting on something simple. Morgan can ignore distant suspicions. He can talk his way around forensic anomalies. But he cannot ignore a man who helped butcher his mother, walking free in Miami. That is not just a threat to his safety. It is a violation of his story about himself, the story where he avenges the innocent and closes the circle of his own trauma. From there, the logistics of the trap become almost clinical. She tracks Estrada's movements, keeps him on a tight leash with supposed check-ins and limited options for where he can go. She coordinates surveillance, positions unmarked units, and, crucially, keeps herself just far enough away to watch without contaminating the scene. This is the story of LaGuerta, trying to do what the Bay Harbor Task Force never quite managed: catch the killer in the act, not in the files. But Dexter feels the net tightening. He senses Estrada's fear, senses LaGuerta's invisible hand behind the sudden freedom. What follows is a three-way chess match where every move could be fatal. Dexter tries to isolate Estrada, to pull him off the board without leaving LaGuerta anything she can use. Estrada, caught between a cop who wants him alive and a monster who wants him dead, scrambles for any exit. LaGuerta waits for the pattern she has predicted to emerge. Dexter escapes again. No body on a table, no clean shot of Morgan with a knife, no neat confession. Yet, for LaGuerta, the absence is almost as loud as proof. He is there, circling every engineered situation she creates, always where the lines converge. And as we are going to see, each near miss only deepens her certainty, driving her toward one last trap that will not be so easy to slip. Each time Dexter slips away from one of LaGuerta's engineered situations, the clean, controlled rooms, where a table can be wrapped in plastic and a life can be reduced to a series of cuts and confessions. When she connects that habit to the original container, and then to the butcher's victims who circle that same history, the symbolism stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like a roadmap. So LaGuerta plans something that looks, on paper, almost simple. A controlled release of Estrada, a quiet check on Dexter's movements, surveillance at the marina, a few carefully chosen colleagues brought in just far enough to legitimize her actions, but not far enough to warn Morgan or give him time to adjust his mask. This is the story of a lieutenant who finally understands that if she moves through official channels, Dexter will see her coming long before she ever sees him. There is a dry irony in how procedural her preparations are. She arranges GPS pulls, camera coverage, backup units. She does the things a good cop is supposed to do. But underneath the paperwork is something more primal, an understanding that Dexter is never more himself than when he believes he is alone with a victim in a sealed space. If she can push him to recreate that under maximum pressure, the truth will have nowhere to go. Her mindset going in is not triumphant. It is grim, almost funereal. Doakes' death, the blood slide at Travis Marshall's church, the way the Bay Harbor butcher case never sat right on her conscience. Every moment feels like it has been pointing her toward this night. She is afraid and she is certain, and she knows that whatever happens inside that container will either vindicate her or end her career. Now, let's pause on the image she is really chasing. An empty metal box at the edge of the docks. No witnesses, no distractions, just cold walls and a concrete floor, waiting in the dark like a stage set for a confession that can no longer be postponed. So we stay with that image for a second. An empty metal box at the edge of the docks, sitting there like it has all the time in the world, while 3 people we have been following for 7 seasons move toward it as if pulled by gravity. This is the night when every mask, every lie, every quiet suspicion in Miami finally has to choose a side. Outside, the air feels wrong. It is that humid, heavy Miami night where sound carries strangely over the water and the cranes look like skeletons against the sky. When you lay them all out together, the details feel almost ritualistic. A specific container, a specific man, Hector Estrada, tied to Dexter Morgan's origin story. A specific captain who has decided that this is the moment she will prove the Bay Harbor butcher never died with James Doakes. Dexter moves first. Practiced, efficient. He has lured Estrada here as both catharsis and cleanup. Another kill that, on paper, followed the GPS pings, the marina records, the pattern of containers that link back to Dexter's childhood trauma. She does not need a confession to be convinced anymore. In her mind, this night is simple. The real Bay Harbor butcher will not be able to resist tying up the Estrada thread himself. All she has to do is be close enough when he overextends. Her movements are careful, almost reverent. No sirens, no backup rushing in. Just a gun, a badge, and years of doubt about Doakes hardening into certainty about Morgan. And then there is Deborah, the wild card the original Bay Harbor task force never accounted for. She is driving through the dark with her phone buzzing, torn in a way no internal affairs report could ever capture. Her brother on one side, her badge on the other. She is heading toward that container because she is trying to save Dexter from LaGuerta and LaGuerta from Dexter, without fully admitting that both cannot walk out. By the time all 3 of them converge on that concrete floor, the container stops being just a crime scene. It becomes a pressure cooker where years of secrets, favors, promotions, rescues, and lies are compressed into a single, airless room. Settle in, get comfortable. Because what happens next is not just about catching a killer. It is about what someone does when the person they have unmasked is the one they love most. Inside the container, everything feels too close. The metal walls rise straight up, streaked with rust, swallowing sound, so that every word LaGuerta and Dexter speak comes back to them a half-second later as an echo. There is just enough space for the plastic sheeting, the table, the tools of Dexter Morgan's second life, and two people who suddenly have no room left to pretend. The air is still. You can almost hear the hum of the harbor outside, muffled by steel, like the world has been turned down, so we are going to hear every line of this confrontation. It is fitting because this is the story of a woman who has been told for years that she is wrong, finally stepping up into a place that proves she was right. LaGuerta does not start with emotion. She starts with evidence. In that calm, prosecutorial tone she used to win promotions at Miami Metro Homicide, she walks Dexter through his own trail. The blood slide at Travis Marshall's church, identical to the Bay Harbor Butcher's trophies, found at a scene where only a handful of people had access. The boat logs that show Dexter's slice of life, slipping out at odd hours, tracing routes, and that, when you lay them all out together, overlap almost perfectly with the original dump sites in the bay. She moves on. The gas station footage of Dexter near Hector Estrada, right after she had Estrada released, supposedly as bait for the reel against the table currently waiting behind him. He tries to reframe the gas station video, the boat logs, even the blood slide, as coincidences and frame jobs. But the container does not give him anywhere to hide. When she mentions his mother's murder in a shipping container, his brother Brian, the way that trauma echoes through the Bay Harbor pattern, his mask slips for a fraction of a second. LaGuerta sees it. We do too. That tiny crack where composure and monstrosity overlap. By the time she finishes, something fundamental has shifted. In this metal box, with the echoes of her own voice coming back to her, LaGuerta is no longer a captain with a hunch. She has answered her question. She does not just suspect Dexter Morgan. She understands him. And that is exactly what makes what happens next so dangerous. And then the door opens. Deborah walks into the container, expecting a routine check on her brother. Instead, she steps into a frozen tableau. LaGuerta on the floor, zip tie biting into her wrist. Dexter standing over her with a gun and a truth that is no longer theoretical. In a single glance, she sees it all. The unspoken thing that has been circling her for seasons is now standing in front of her, fully articulated, with no room left to hide. This is the pattern interrupt of her entire life. For years, she has lived in the uneasy space between what she feels about Dexter Morgan and what she knows as a cop at Miami Metro Homicide. She has seen the blood slide at Travis Marshall's church, the improbably convenient arrests, the way danger seems to orbit her brother and then disappear. But this is different. Here, LaGuerta is literally saying the words out loud. He is the Bay Harbor Butcher. And suddenly, Deborah is not a bystander. She is the deciding factor. She is the only person in this metal box who has already crossed the line of knowing Dexter's secret and choosing to protect him. That history matters, because when you lay them all out together, the church fire, the staged crime scenes, the bodies that never made sense, you start to see that Deborah has been slowly training herself to live with the impossible. LaGuerta understands that and goes straight for the part of Deborah that is hardest to corrupt. She does not beg for her life as a friend. She prosecutes the case as a captain. She calls Deborah lieutenant, reminds her of her oath, points to the evidence. The GPS records that put Dexter's boat over the old Bay Harbor dump sites. The gas station footage that tied him to Estrada. The fact that this very container connects Dexter's childhood trauma to multiple victims. She is asking Deborah to see what is in front of her, not what she wishes were true. Deborah hears all of it. The loyalty to her brother does not erase the words. It layers guilt on top of them. She knows that siding with LaGuerta would almost certainly end Dexter's freedom. What LaGuerta proves, in the end, is not born out of a single dramatic revelation. It is built from accumulation. From one quiet, stubborn woman at Miami Metro Homicide, refusing to let the most infamous case of her career sit neatly solved when the pieces never quite fit. We are going to walk back through those pieces, because when you lay them all out together, you start to see how inescapable Dexter Morgan's guilt really is from her point of view. It starts with that one. Out-of-place bloodslide at Travis Marshall's church, the Bay Harbor butcher's signature, long after the butcher is supposed to be dead, long after Doakes has taken the blame and the body count. LaGuerta recognizes it immediately, and that tiny rectangle of glass quietly reopens the entire story of Bay Harbor in her mind. She pulls the old files. She rereads the FBI profile about a forensically skilled insider with access to crime scenes and a boat. She looks at Doakes again, at the way his movements in those reports are not circling victims, but circling Dexter. And suddenly, the exoneration begins, not with some emotional loyalty to her former partner, but with a simple logistical question. If Doakes was always following Dexter, and the butcher was always one step ahead, who is really hunting whom? From there, the pattern tightens. She traces Dexter's proximity to key victims and scenes across the series, and season by season. He is at the marina that matches the algae. He is on call for almost every major Bay Harbor milestone. He is the common line running through cases that never should have touched each other. Then she finds the shipping container, the place where Dexter's mother was murdered, the place that links him to Brian Moser, and that, in turn, overlaps with the Bay Harbor disposal pattern. Now the case has motive and psychology. A traumatized child who witnessed dismemberment in a container, growing into an adult whose chosen kill room is, repeatedly, the same kind of space. A code focused on other killers, on recreating and controlling the chaos of that original scene. This is the story of a profile snapping into focus. The logistics follow. She tracks his boat movements and sees them overlap with the original dump sites. She releases Estrada as bait and then pulls gas station footage that places Dexter near him at exactly the wrong moment. Every time she tests him, he appears where only the butcher should be. But that is not all she has. Day after day, she watches Dexter's emotional detachment, the way his lies are not panicked but strategic, the way he anticipates investigative turns he should not see coming. These are the threads that stitch the hard data together. So when she walks into that final shipping container, she does not need a confession. She already has a coherent, if unspectacular, case. Physical signatures, patterns of presence, motive, still thinking this is a private chess match he can control. Suddenly, Miami Metro Homicide is not quietly whispering about LaGuerta's theory in hallways. They are answering reporters, the mayor, the FBI. The department has to confront her evidence, not just her reputation. Or imagine she brings in an outside investigator the way Lundy was brought in for the original case. Someone with no history with Doakes, no loyalty to Dexter, no reason to dismiss LaGuerta as obsessed. That person sees the boat logs, the overlap with the original Bay Harbor dump sites, the bloodslide at Travis Marshall's church, the shipping container that ties Dexter Morgan's childhood trauma to multiple victims. Suddenly, the pattern is not a hunch. It is a file on someone else's desk. Because the truth is, LaGuerta is operating with almost enough, and you start to see how little more she would have needed. One surviving victim who remembers Dexter's voice through the plastic. One eyewitness who sees him loading a wrapped body onto his boat at night instead of just seeing Morgan leaving late. One kill room the tide does not quite erase, where the plastic and the tape and the tools match his purchase history. Any of those pieces would have turned her quiet suspicion into something that could survive a courtroom. But Dexter's survival is not just about his ritual and his code. It is about near misses and lucky breaks and the way people around him choose comfort over clarity. Batista wants to remember Doakes as the villain the files say he was. Matthews wants the Bay Harbor butcher case to stay closed. Deborah wants her brother to be damaged, but salvageable, not a serial killer hiding in plain sight. LaGuerta is almost alone in refusing that denial, and even she runs out of time. In that final shipping container, Deborah's choice is the ultimate alternate future. If she lowers her gun and arrests Dexter instead of shooting LaGuerta, every year of quiet work is instantly validated. The GPS data, the boat routes, the slide at the church, Estrada's disappearance, all of it suddenly rearranges itself around the simple fact that LaGuerta was right. This is the story of Dexter Morgan finally being seen by the institution he has served. Instead, one bullet resets the narrative. Officially, LaGuerta dies a tragic casualty of chaos, not the woman who almost unmasked the Bay Harbor butcher. And as we move into what comes after her, settle in, get comfortable, because the line between Dexter's freedom and exposure is about to look even thinner. Because here is the quiet twist in all of this. LaGuerta's story does not end where the bullets do. It keeps echoing, especially when you rewatch, looking away. On rewatch, her gradual awakening feels less like a subplot and more like a mirror. We are going to follow her from that single bloodslide at the Doomsday Killer's church to the moment she pulls the old butcher files to her realization that Doakes was tracking Dexter more than any victim. As you already know where Dexter ends up, you also know in the back of your mind that this luck cannot hold forever. LaGuerta becomes the voice of that knowledge inside the story. This is the story of a character who behaves the way an attentive viewer thinks. She questions why the shipping container that made Dexter who he is also sits at the crossroads of Brian Moser, multiple Bay Harbor dump sites, and Morgan's own history. She looks at the gas station footage with Estrada and does the one thing so many people in Dexter's life never quite do. She lets the implication land instead of talking herself out of it. There's a quiet, almost dry irony in the way the series treats her. Inside Miami Metro, she is the outlier, the one who will not accept the comforting narrative that the case is closed and the monster is dead. Outside the fiction, she is us on a second viewing, noticing how the boat routes line up, how the timing never quite adds up. how every season edges Dexter closer to someone finally saying his name out loud. And when you revisit her investigation in one long, continuous line, as we are doing here, it stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like inevitability. The show's structure invites that realization. Understanding how LaGuerta knew does not just vindicate her. It exposes how fragile Dexter's carefully constructed life always was, and how thin that line between freedom and exposure has been from the very beginning. And once you see that thin line, you also see why almost no one was willing to step across it with her. LaGuerta is standing in a building that has already solved the Bay Harbor butcher case. Miami Metro has its monster. It has a narrative that turned a messy internal failure into a tragic hero story about doakes losing control. To reopen that wound is not just inconvenient, it is institutionally suicidal. The incentives all point the other way. Admitting Doakes was innocent means admitting the FBI profile was right about an inside man. It means conceding that the bodies dumped off Bay Harbor were the work of someone who walked those same fluorescent hallways, drank that same bad coffee, smiled at the same morning briefings. It means scandal, lawsuits, destroyed careers. When you lay them all out together, you start to see why LaGuerta's files stay on her desk and not in a task force conference room. And then there's Dexter himself. Morgan is not just a colleague. By season 7, he is the quiet center of Miami Metro homicide. Batista to that psychology with a disadvantage. Her reputation has always been political, ambitious, willing to trade cases for promotions. The same qualities that let her survive the bureaucracy make it easy for others to frame her renewed interest in Bay Harbor as self-serving. Of course, she's reopening Doakes' case, they think. It is about legacy. It is about power. It is about her. That is the tragedy. The one person who finally sees Dexter clearly is also the one person whose motives are easiest to doubt. So when she pulls old GPS records, when she quietly tracks Dexter's boat against the original dump sites, when she tests him with Estrada and the gas station camera, she does it alone. No task force, no partner, no institutional cover. This is the story of how an organization can look directly at evidence and still not see the threat inside its own walls. As we are going to follow LaGuerta into that final shipping container, settle in, get comfortable, because her failure is not just personal. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when a system is designed to protect its story before it protects the truth. And the shadow of that failure does not stop in that shipping container. It stretches years into the future, into snow instead of humidity, into a town that has never heard of Miami Metro homicide, where Dexter Morgan has a new name, a new job, a new life. Or at least, that is the story he tells himself. Because when the revival picks up with Dexter years later, what you start to see is not a man who has outgrown his darkness, but a man who has simply changed the scenery around it. The impulses LaGuerta was circling in her files are still there. The need to control, the meticulous ritual, the way he scans every room for threat and opportunity in the same breath. The code may be quieter, the tools better hidden, but the pattern feels eerily familiar. In Miami, Dexter split his days between blood spatter reports and quiet murder. In Iron Lake, he swaps palm trees for pines, lab coat for retail. But the double life remains. Daytime, Dexter smiles, flirts, plays the harmless oddball. Nighttime, Dexter calculates, stalks, rehearses. The geography changes, the weather changes, the supporting cast changes. The mask does not. When you lay them all out together, the seasons in Miami and the years in exile, LaGuerta's psychological profile stops looking like a theory and starts looking like a diagnosis. This is the story of a personality structure, not a phase. LaGuerta suspected that if the Bay Harbor butcher was Dexter, he would never simply stop. He would adapt. He would get better at hiding. Watching the revival, you can almost hear her old case notes under the surface of each scene. The same careful compartmentalization. The same ability to mimic normal emotion, just long enough to disarm suspicion. Her chains of later suffering simply do not happen. Fewer bodies, fewer broken lives. Instead, the revival invites you to look back and realize that LaGuerta came closer than anyone to ending the story early, before it metastasized into other towns, other families, other tragedies. Her death does not diminish her. It amplifies her, turning her into one of the only people who ever truly saw the long-term danger Dexter represented. And yet, even she did not see the next person who would pick up the trail. And yet, even she did not see the next person who would pick up the trail. That, in a way, is the final irony of LaGuerta's story. She spends a whole season peeling back Dexter Morgan's mask, only to become one more body in the long shadow he casts over Miami. Because Dexter's greatest asset is not his knife or his code or even his job at Miami Metro Homicide. It is the mask, the easy smile, the donuts in the morning, the careful, practiced harmlessness that makes you feel like he is the safest person in the room, even as he is quietly cataloging everyone in it. By the time we meet him in the series, he has turned normalcy into performance art. We are going to see that LaGuerta's journey is really about unlearning her own comfort with that performance. At first, she does what everyone else does. She trusts the resume, the reputation, the way Dexter shows up at crime scenes with answers and empathy. But when you lay them all out together, the blood slide in the church, the boat records, the gas station footage, you start to see how she forces herself to stop asking, "Who seems dangerous?" and start asking, "Whose behavior actually fits the pattern?" That is the thin line this story keeps circling. Monsters in Dexter's world are rarely the obvious ones. They are the helpful blood guy, the devoted brother, the analyst who never misses a day of work. They are integrated, indispensable, woven so tightly into the system that catching them would mean admitting the system itself has been feeding them. LaGuerta looks at Doakes, the designated problem, and then looks again at Morgan, the designated solution, and has the audacity to switch those labels in her own mind. There is a cost for being that kind of person, the one who notices, the one who keeps saying, "Something is wrong here," in a room that would rather move on to the next case. LaGuerta is isolated at Miami Metro, second-guessed by colleagues, quietly patronized by people who think she is chasing a ghost. She doubts herself, then goes back to the files anyway. She releases Estrada as bait and then has to live with what that means. Every moment she spends staring at Dexter's mask makes her more alone. Now, let's sit with the uncomfortable. Each one was small, almost gentle, like a thought you could still choose to ignore. It begins with a single slide on a church floor, Travis Marshall's ruined altar, the doomsday killer case seemingly closed, and there, glinting in the light, a drop of blood on glass that should not exist anymore. The Bay Harbor butcher's signature, resurrected. LaGuerta does not announce a revelation. She just takes the slide, pulls the old files from storage, and lets an old loyalty stir awake. This is the story of a woman who never truly believed that James Doakes was the butcher. In those dusty Bay Harbor boxes, she finds what she always half remembered. Doakes was chasing Dexter Morgan as often as he was chasing victims, turning up at the same marinas, the same stretches of water, the same shadows around Miami. The FBI profile that once pointed to a forensically skilled insider with a boat starts to look less like a solved mystery and more like a description of the man in Dexter's lab coat. From there, the mosaic grows, one quiet tile at a time. She traces the shipping container where Dexter's mother was killed, sees how it connects Dexter, Brian Moser, and men who later turned up as Bay Harbor butcher victims. She looks at boat logs, GPS pings, the routes that leave Miami Metro, and arc out toward those old dump sites, and you start to see how the lines keep bending back to the same name. No single piece screams, but together they whisper the same thing, and every near miss only deepens that whisper. She releases Estrada on purpose, a controlled risk, and then watches security footage that shows Dexter near him at a gas station almost immediately afterward. She finds him at the docks at just the wrong time, notices how often he appears at the edges of disappearing men. Each time Dexter slips away, each time the explanation is just a little too neat. The mask looks thinner to her, the pattern sharper. Emotionally, her arc is just as gradual. Loyalty first, to Doakes, to the idea that her friend was framed. Then doubt, not explosive, but patient, as she replays every briefing, every joke in the Miami Metro homicide bullpen, every moment Dexter stood beside her in the glow of fluorescent lights. Resolve comes later, when the evidence has settled into place, and she is willing to risk her career, her reputation, even her life to walk into that final shipping container and call him what he is. By the time she dies there, silenced before she can bring the case into daylight, the truth she uncovered does not vanish. It simply goes unwritten in the official file. And as we slow down with her, letting these details blur into the impression of a long, quiet hunt, we are also drifting toward the next watcher, the next person whose love for Dexter will make denial harder and escape much, much quieter. So now we can finally answer it, gently and direct, and you start to see the shape she sees. Doakes was not orbiting the victims. He was orbiting Dexter. She traces GPS records, marina logs, the routes of a modest little boat that somehow mirrors the dump sites the FBI mapped years ago. Each piece on its own is deniable. When you lay them all out together, it is harder to look away. And then there is the psychology. LaGuerta is not just building a forensic chart, she is building a person. She knows Dexter's mother was murdered in that shipping container. She knows Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, was his brother. She watches the way Morgan talks about blood, about order, about monsters who deserve what happens to them. His calm, his code, his uncanny fit with the butchers, victimology, turns from a coincidence into a pattern she can feel. Here is the pattern interrupt. She lets Estrada go, not as a mistake, but as an experiment. If she is wrong, Estrada disappears. If she is right, Dexter will move. The gas station camera catches him exactly where she expects, at exactly the moment she predicts. It is not courtroom proof. It is, however, confirmation that her map of his inner life is accurate. By the time she walks into that final container, LaGuerta does not need a taped confession. She has the blood slide, The resurrected files, the boat routes, the footage, the shared trauma, the code. She has a story of Bay Harbor that only makes sense if Dexter is at the center. So how did she know? She chose to trust the pattern instead of the comforting mask. Again and again, across season after season, she picked the harder story over the easier one, even when it cost her career, her alliances, and finally her life. And as we settle in, get comfortable with that idea, we're going to watch someone much closer to Dexter face the same choice, with far less distance and far more to lose. So now the pace changes. The hard edges of accusation and proof start to blur a little. And what we are going to listen to instead is the rhythm of Dexter Morgan's days and nights, the quiet metronome of a double life that always sounded so steady until someone really heard it. Every morning, Dexter walks into Miami Metro Homicide under fluorescent lights. He smiles, he carries coffee, he makes small talk about traffic and weather and weekend plans. He leans over blood spatter, writes lab reports, signs his name in careful, ordinary handwriting. On paper, this is the story of a man whose life is routine, almost dull in its predictability. And every single night, the pattern inverts. The same hands that pass evidence bags, prepare plastic sheeting. The same eyes that read case files, scan empty warehouses and dark corners of the bay. There are kill rooms instead of conference rooms, a knife instead of a pen, the soft hum of his boat instead of the office air conditioner. Day is procedure. A single blood slide appears at Travis Marshall's church, identical to the Bay Harbor trophies. It is less a shock than a note she recognizes. A familiar chord struck again. She follows it quietly, through old files and new reports, through GPS records and shipping containers and boat logs that line up a little too neatly with bodies in the water. While Dexter tries to keep his tempo even, she is the one tapping her finger to the places it skips. At this point, you do not need every detail to feel what is happening. You can let the specifics soften around the edges and simply notice the shape of the story. A long, slow tightening of a net around a man who believed he was untouchable, a lullaby that keeps repeating until the pattern gives him away. And as the lights begin to dim on this stage, as seasons pass and the circle grows smaller, LaGuerta's presence becomes less a question and more an inevitability. Let's stay with that feeling for a moment, because the next time we follow her into the dark, the song of Dexter's two lives will finally reach its last quiet note. And as the lights begin to dim on the stage, as seasons pass and the circle grows smaller, LaGuerta's presence becomes less a question and more an inevitability. Let's stay with that feeling for a moment, because if you are somehow still here, still awake with us, you are in a very small circle too. Settle in, get comfortable, just for these last few breaths of the story. By now, some people have already drifted off somewhere back in Miami, maybe around the algae in Bay Harbor, or the blood slide at Travis Marshall's church, or that gas station camera catching Dexter a little too close to Estrada. Their screens are still glowing, but they are gone. You are one of the ones who stayed. So we're going to speak a little softer here. If you like this kind of long, ambient walk through a character's undoing, these slow investigations, where every moment is allowed to breathe, you might want to stay in this world with us. This is the story of Dexter Morgan, told not as a rush of kills and twists, but as a quiet accumulation of close calls, hidden patterns, and the psychology that finally lets someone like LaGuerta see through the mask. If you'd like more of that, More nights where we follow the faint line from a forgotten case file in Miami Metro homicide to a shipping container on the docks. You can subscribe while you are here and awake. You start to see, when you lay them all out together, how every small mistake, every overlooked detail becomes part of a longer rhythm you can fall asleep to. Supporting the channel, even with something as simple as a subscription, keeps that rhythm going. Not now, necessarily. Not if your eyes are heavy and the room is already fading at the edges. But when you have the energy again, we saw at the beginning of this story, slow strings of headlights sliding along the causeways, red and white beads of light threading between the dark shapes of palm trees. Somewhere, a siren starts, far away and unhurried, more like a reminder than an alarm. High-rise buildings stand in quiet rows, their windows glowing in scattered patterns, each lit square a small, self-contained world. You start to see how easy it is, in a city like this, for a man like Dexter Morgan to move through the crowd. For years, he walked into Miami Metro homicide with coffee and case files, and then walked back out into the soft, humid darkness, his boat waiting in the marina, the water carrying him away, while most people were already inside, closing their blinds, turning on the television. And for just as many years, a woman like LaGuerta watched him more closely than anyone else, even when she did not yet have the words for what she was seeing. That is one of the strange comforts of cities. They are full of stories you will never know. Somewhere above that slow traffic, someone is hiding something. 2 floors down, someone is trying to prove what they think they have finally understood. A secret, an investigation, a near miss that brushes right past a stranger in the elevator who never realizes how close they came to the center of someone else's crisis. When you lay them all out together, the Bay Harbor Butcher files look like the defining mystery of this fictional Miami. Doakes' name, the headlines, the aerial shots of bodies in the water. But if you pull the camera back the way we are doing now, it becomes one dark current among many, a single thread, twisting beneath the bright surface of a busy place that keeps moving, no matter what happens in one precinct, in one shipping container, in one ruined life. This is the story of how that current briefly rose to the surface, how a single blood slide found in a church, a few GPS pings on a boat, and a detective's long memory formed a pattern in one person's mind, while the rest of the city kept driving, kept sleeping, kept talking about the heat. So let's allow the language and the camera to slow down. The view lifts higher. The sound of traffic softens into a low, even hum. The lights of Miami blur into an abstract constellation, no longer Dexter's Miami or LaGuerta's, just a wide, indifferent glow. Somewhere in that glow, for a time, they walked past each other and almost changed nothing. And then, very slowly, they changed everything. From up there, the city looks smooth, almost harmless. But when you lay them all out together, every body, every boat trip, every late night in the lab, you start to see the shape of the impossibility we have been circling. A serial killer working inside Miami Metro homicide, disposing of bodies in his own jurisdiction, sitting in case briefings about himself. Strategy. Deborah needs her brother to be her anchor, so she edits out every strange pause and late arrival. Batista needs his captain, his friend, his sense that the job basically works. Masuka needs the lab to be a place where the worst thing that happens is a bad pun. To truly suspect Dexter would mean suspecting the entire story, they tell themselves about who they are and what Miami Metro is. LaGuerta is different because she allows herself to be uncomfortable. She reopens a closed case everyone has agreed to bury. She looks at that single blood slide from Travis Marshall's church, and instead of accepting the convenient answer, she lets the question spread inward. What if the Bay Harbor butcher was never out there? What if he has been sitting at these desks the whole time? That is a rare move in fiction and in life. Most of us stop at the first explanation that lets us sleep. LaGuerta keeps going past the point where her career, her friendships, even her memories of doakes would be safer if she just stopped. She pulls old files. She traces Dexter's boat routes against the dump sites. She tests him with Estrada and then watches the gas station footage that proves her worst suspicion. She walks into that last shipping container already knowing that if she is right, her world is going to break. And it does. She pays the highest possible price for seeing clearly. The irony is quiet and brutal. The one person who truly solves the Bay Harbor butcher case dies in the exact kind of staged scene Dexter has built his life on hiding. Yet her clarity lingers over the series like a final, steady light. When you think back over every moment, he almost got caught. Her refusal to look away becomes one of Dexter's most haunting legacies. Now, let's follow what happens when that legacy passes to someone even closer than LaGuerta ever was. So now, as that legacy moves closer to home, we're going to slow everything down. Settle in, get comfortable. Let's let the sharp edges of the Bay Harbor butcher case soften and just walk back through what brought Maria LaGuerta to Dexter Morgan's truth. It begins with something small, a single blood slide at Travis Marshall's ruined church, glinting in the light, the way those old trophies once did. In the noise of Miami Metro homicide, it could have been just an odd detail, a relic from another season of the story. But LaGuerta remembers. She remembers doakes, remembers those slides, remembers how neatly the case closed around a man she never believed was a monster. From there, the path is quiet but steady. She goes back into the files, into that sealed box of history everyone else has agreed not to open. When you lay them all out together, patterns that once looked like coincidence start to line up. Dexter near victims, Dexter on reports, Dexter's name at the margin of Estrada right after she lets him go. Again, no single moment screams, but you start to see why she cannot look away. Then the container. The same kind of place where Morgan's life was split in two, where Brian's path diverged, where the Bay Harbor butcher's victims were sometimes last seen. When LaGuerta steps into that final space, she is not discovering something new. She is arriving at the end of a line she has been following for years. A hunter, finally standing where the hunted has always felt most at home. This is the story of how she knew. She watched. She remembered. She refused to forget what everyone else allowed to fade. As you drift, you can let the details blur. Keep only the outline. A city that almost woke up. A mask that almost slipped. Two people in a quiet container on opposite sides of a truth that could not stay buried forever. And then, even that can soften and go still. And now, we can let them go. We have walked with Dexter Morgan through Miami's humid nights and Metro's fluorescent mornings, following every close call, every almost, every narrow little space where the mask slipped just enough for someone like LaGuerta to see the outline beneath. For a while, we stepped into that world, with him and with her. But you do not have to stay there. This is the story of two people who could not stop circling each other, even when it meant standing in a dark shipping container at the end of a long, long line of choices. For you, it does not have to be that heavy. You can just let it be a story you visited for a while, and then quietly set back down on the shelf. If you are still awake, you start to see how different it feels when you lay them all out together. Doakes watching from the shadows. LaGuerta holding on to an old case file everyone else signed off on. A single blood slide in a ruined church. A gas station camera catching Morgan one step too close to Estrada. When you are tired, those are not puzzle pieces you have to solve. They are just soft, familiar beats you can drift through at your own pace. And if you're not awake, that is fine too. Maybe you heard a few names, a few seasons, a few moments where someone in Miami almost said the truth out loud. Maybe the rest blurred into background noise, a low, steady current of voices, an ocean and distant sirens. That is all this needs to be. Here, we are going to keep doing this. Long, slow walks through complicated characters and the people who almost caught them. Near misses, suspicions, patterns that only become obvious when you lay them all out together across a whole series. These are not urgent breakdowns you have to keep up with. They are meant to sit beside you, an audio companion for late nights when you want a story, but not a demand. So